Some of you would be able to remember with me a phrase that's sometimes used, the Vietnam syndrome. And the Vietnam syndrome refers to something the military of the United States was extremely preoccupied over. That in the aftermath of the Vietnam War, there was a widespread revulsion, a sense that warfare is wrongful and that people were angry that we had been involved in the war in Vietnam, that it cost the lives of 50,000 United States soldiers, and we're sometimes given an estimate of at least 2 million Vietnamese civilians. Well, how do you overcome the Vietnam syndrome? I think big think tanks were assigned the work of trying to figure that out. And some of the answers that were generated were that you, in future wars, must never have a conscripted army because that can bring about great antagonism. So look for a volunteer army, and perhaps a poverty draft of sorts would help swell the numbers of people that are in the army. Another thing was to assure that people wouldn't see graphic images of the consequences of war. Don't show the coffins returning. Have no image in people's minds of what happens to people whose bodies are blown apart by United States bombs. And then a third thing is, if you can nurture the idea that it's a humanitarian war, that the cause of the war is really something that's intended to protect women and children, this will resonate well with the U.S. public. Now, I would like to suggest that, try as they might have tried, the people who've been public relations proponents of warfare, war in Iraq and war in Afghanistan, have actually not been all that successful with the U.S. public. The public opinion polls show that 60 to 65% of the people in the United States want the war in Afghanistan to end. But it's become increasingly difficult in this democracy in the United States to have those opinions turn into the kind of political will that can actually coerce the United States government into paying attention, paying heed, and acting in accord with the will of the people in this country. And this is a big problem that we face. I would reiterate that we have much more capacity to raise our voices. We have much more capacity to exercise the strength to end our addiction to warfare than the people who are in front of the crosshairs, who are bearing the brunt of our wars. But it is a very, very difficult thing to do. I don't want to underestimate that, because it requires a great deal of education so that people will understand what the mainstream media will not very easily disclose to us, that the $2 billion being spent per week on our warfare have not created a humanitarian improvement within Afghanistan would be a first step.